What's the most unexplainable thing that ever happened to you? Story 1. 3 years ago, I landed an internship with a green energy company whose whole mission was bringing electricity to remote villages in Africa. Sounds noble and inspiring, right? What nobody mentioned was that I'd apparently be walking straight into the weirdest coincidence of my life. After arriving, I was told to stop at a local store and pick up a utility trailer before meeting the engineering team. Pretty routine. The store itself looked like something built from pure side quests. It sold food, tools, medicine, random supplies. And behind it was a giant junkyard packed with rusting vehicles, old machinery, even abandoned planes. The kind of place where you expect a stranger to hand you a treasure map or a curse. The owner was outside repairing an outboard motor when I arrived. Friendly guy. Shook my hand, asked what I needed. I explained who I was and handed him my company ID. My driver's license was visible behind it. He glanced down at my name. Then his expression completely changed. Not scared, not excited, just confused. The man looked back at me and asked, "Do you have a father or relative with the same name who lived in Tennessee?" Every thought in my brain slammed into a wall. Because yes, I was named after my father. And no, our last name wasn't exactly Smith. I remember staring at him thinking, okay, what fresh nonsense is this? Then he told me a story. Back in the late 1970s, a young American serviceman had stopped at his store, same first name, same last name, looked a lot like me. The man said he immediately recognized the resemblance. I laughed and told him it couldn't be my dad. As far as I knew, my father had never been anywhere near Africa. Then he started describing him, his appearance, his military service, his personality, the guitar he carried with him. And suddenly, I realized this guy wasn't guessing. He knew him. Decades earlier, my father had apparently helped him repair a vehicle. When the work was done, the owner offered him money. My dad refused. The owner invited him home for dinner instead. During the meal, the man's young son became fascinated by my father's guitar and asked if he could see it. My dad played for the family. The boy sat there completely mesmerized. Then, when it was time to leave, my father did something nobody expected. He handed the kid the guitar, just gave it to him. No payment, no conditions, only one request: practice every day. And maybe someday he'd come back and hear him play. At this point, I was already struggling to process what I was hearing. My dad had died when I was young. Most of what I know about him comes from stories. And now here I was, thousands of miles from home, listening to a stranger tell me one I'd never heard before. The owner invited me upstairs for dinner. I accepted. Honestly, at that point, I would have followed this story wherever it wanted to go. Halfway through the meal, he disappeared into another room and returned carrying an old guitar case. He set it in front of me. "The guitar," he said. "The same guitar. The one my father had given away all those years ago." Then he told me what happened afterward. The boy never forgot it. He practiced constantly, studied music, went to college, became a professional instructor. That one gift had completely changed the direction of his life. And suddenly, I understood something that hit harder than any coincidence. My father had been gone for years, but this simple act of kindness was still moving through the world like a ripple, still affecting people, still creating new stories. Then came the final punch to the emotional kidneys. The owner asked if I played. I told him I only knew one song all the way through. He smiled and asked me to play it, so I did. Halfway through, both he and his wife started crying. I stopped and asked what was wrong. The man looked at me and said, "That's the last song your father played before he gave my son the guitar. And listen, I know how insane that sounds. Trust me, I've replayed it 1,000 times. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe it's fate. Maybe life occasionally writes stories that are so absurdly perfect, they sound fake. But sitting there, holding my father's guitar on the other side of the world, playing the last song he ever played on it for the people whose lives he changed, for a moment, it felt like time had folded in on itself. Like I wasn't there because of an internship. I was there because a kindness my father showed decades earlier had finally come back around to tell me who he really was. And honestly, that's a better inheritance than the guitar ever could have been. Story 2. 6 years ago, I was 8 months deep into being homeless, thanks to booze absolutely body slamming my life into a ditch. I'd been staying at a shelter for a few weeks, drifting between the library and wherever my brain could avoid itself for a couple hours. One evening, walking back for dinner, I finally cracked, like genuinely done. My mom had died the previous August, and standing there on the sidewalk, I actually said out loud, "Mom, I can't do this anymore. Help me." Yeah, I know. Sounds like the opening scene of a movie that wins awards nobody watches. After dinner, everybody was hanging around waiting for showers and lights out. Shelter was unusually packed that night. Because of the extra people, they randomly opened the basement where they kept donated clothes. Totally unscheduled. I didn't even need anything. I was just bored and killing time because apparently Rock Bottom still has waiting rooms. So I wandered downstairs, flipped through racks of donated junk, found nothing, and started heading back up. Then I froze. Sitting near the stairs was a stuffed dog called Lamut. Not just the same toy, the toy. I hadn't seen one in over 20 years. Suddenly I could picture being a little kid, standing in a store with my mom while she bought it for me. Crystal clear memory. Out of nowhere. I asked a volunteer where it came from. Guy had no clue. And here's the weird part that still messes with me. This was a men's homeless shelter. Nobody was dropping off stuffed animals for a bunch of addicts and drunks. Yet somehow, on the exact night I begged my dead mother for help, there was this random childhood toy waiting at the bottom of the stairs like some cosmic sticky note. Hey, dumbass. Not today. Maybe coincidence. Maybe grief. Maybe my brain was desperate enough to grab onto anything. Who knows? I kept the dog, still have him, and somehow life kept going. I'm graduating with a BFA now. Got stability, got a future. Things are actually good, which feels illegal sometimes after everything that happened. So yeah, maybe it was random, but if my mom found a way to throw a stuffed dog through the universe just to keep me alive one more night, that honestly sounds exactly like something she'd do. Story 3. A couple years ago, I had one of those dreams that sticks to your brain like wet paint. The weird part is that it wasn't even about someone I was especially close to. It was my grandfather. We weren't estranged or anything, but we also weren't the kind of family that talked every day. He was just there, a distant figure in the family tree. So when I dreamed about him that night, it felt random. In the dream, I was standing in a room full of people dressed in black. Quiet conversations, sad faces, that heavy atmosphere where nobody wants to be the first person to speak. At the front of the room was a casket covered by an American flag. My grandfather had served in the military, so even inside the dream, that detail made perfect sense. Then I noticed something stranger. My grandfather was standing beside me, not in the casket, next to me, completely calm, completely aware, no confusion, no fear, nothing like the Alzheimer's that had affected him near the end of his life, just him, the version of himself that seemed fully present. He reached over and held my hand. And somehow I knew exactly what I was looking at. Not a memory, not a normal dream, a goodbye. We stood there together for what felt like a long time without saying much. Then eventually he turned toward a set of doors across the room. Before leaving, he looked back at me and said, "Don't follow me." That's all. No dramatic speech, no cryptic prophecy, just that. Then he walked through the doors and disappeared. I remember feeling this overwhelming urge to go after him, but I didn't. I stayed where I was. And then I woke up. Normal morning, sunlight through the window. Nothing unusual. I went downstairs, planning to get breakfast and call my dad because it was his birthday. Before I could do that, my older brother stopped me. My grandfather had died during the night, in his sleep. Around the same time I'd been having that dream. I just stood there, frozen. Because here's the thing. Nobody had warned me. Nobody had told me he was actively dying. I was a teenager, and we weren't particularly close, so I wasn't exactly included in every family update. As far as I knew, life was continuing as normal. Yet somehow I spent the night dreaming about his funeral, watching him say goodbye, and listening to him tell me not to follow him. Then I woke up and learned he'd passed away. To this day, I don't know what to make of it. People always want these stories to end with a declaration. It proved the afterlife. It changed my religion. It confirmed ghosts. Not really. If anything, it left me with more questions than answers. Maybe the human brain notices things we don't consciously understand. Maybe there are connections between people we can't explain. Maybe grief, memory, and coincidence create stories that feel bigger than ourselves. Or maybe the universe occasionally peels back the curtain for half a second, just to remind us how little we actually know. What stays with me isn't the fear. It's how peaceful he seemed. For a man whose final years were clouded by Alzheimer's, the version I met in that dream looked completely free. And honestly, that's the part I've never forgotten. Not the coincidence, not the timing. Just the feeling that for one brief moment he got to say goodbye on his own terms. Story 4. On my 12th birthday, my dad, his girlfriend, my brother, and I were heading into town to buy me a new bike. I was hyped out of my mind, couldn't think about anything else. New bike day is basically Christmas for a kid. We weren't even close to the bike shop yet. Still, like 10 minutes from town. Then this random old guy appeared. And when I say random, I mean the kind of dude who looks like he'd show up in a dream right before something terrible happens. He walked straight up to us, looked directly at me, and said, "You buying a bike?" Now maybe that's not weird by itself, but there was absolutely no reason for him to know that. We weren't carrying bike gear. We weren't near a bike store. Nobody had mentioned bikes out loud. I just stared at him. My dad looked confused. The old guy nodded like he'd already gotten confirmation and launched into a lecture about helmets. Not a casual reminder either. A full-on obsession. "You must wear a helmet every time. Don't ride without one." Over and over. The whole thing felt bizarre enough that we just kind of awkwardly escaped the conversation and moved on with our day. A few hours later, I had my new bike and was tearing through a park, feeling invincible because that's apparently a legal requirement when you're 12. Then I wiped out. Nothing major. I hit some grass. Barely even hurt. I started getting up, brushing dirt off myself, feeling mildly embarrassed. And then I looked up. There he was, the same old guy, just standing there, watching, shaking his head, slowly raising one finger like a disappointed elementary school principal who'd finally caught the troublemaker. "I told you to wear a helmet!" I swear every molecule in my body immediately tried to leave through my spine. I didn't ask questions. I didn't stick around. I became the fastest cyclist in recorded human history and pedaled home like I owed money to demons. Now here's the part that really messes with me. I've moved roughly 50 miles away since then. Different area, different routines, different life, and every once in a while, I still see him. Not often, just enough. Always somewhere random, always looking exactly the same. At this point, I don't know if he's a guardian angel, a glitch in reality, or a retired NPC who keeps spawning into the wrong save file. What I do know is that if I ever get on a bike without a helmet and hear that guy behind me again, I'm immediately turning around and apologizing. No arguments, no questions. Message received, sir, loud and clear. Story 5. A few years ago, my best friend chose assisted suicide after a long battle with a terminal illness. Even now, typing that sentence feels surreal. People imagine moments like that as dramatic or cinematic, but honestly, the reality was mostly quiet, exhausting, heartbreaking, the kind of sadness that drains all the noise out of a room. She decided she wanted to spend her final hours at my house. After she drank the medication, she gradually slipped into a coma. Then we waited, and that's the part nobody really prepares you for, the waiting. You know what's happening, you know what's coming, but your brain still keeps expecting the next minute to be different somehow. Every couple of minutes, we'd check her pulse. Still there. A little weaker, a little slower. Then we'd wait again. The whole thing lasted around 40 minutes. By that point, the room felt suspended outside of time. Nobody was talking much. Nobody knew what to say. My Great Dane had been asleep nearby for most of it, completely uninterested, just snoring through one of the heaviest moments of my life. Then suddenly, without warning, she shot upright. Not slowly, not groggily, instantly. Like somebody had flipped a switch. The dog let out a single muffled bark, just one. Woof! Then she stared directly at my friend, locked on her, completely focused. The room went silent. And then came the part I've replayed in my head 1,000 times. The dog's eyes slowly tracked upward, not toward a person, not toward a sound, just upward, following something none of us could see, for my friend, through empty air, toward the ceiling. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For a second, every hair on my body stood up. Then we leaned over to check her pulse again. And this time, there wasn't one. She was gone. Now look, I'm fully aware there are rational explanations. Dogs hear things we don't. Notice tiny physiological changes we miss. Pick up scents, breathing shifts, muscle relaxation, who knows? Maybe my dog sensed the exact moment her body changed. Maybe that's all it was. But standing in that room, after 40 minutes of waiting, watching a sleeping dog wake up at the precise instant my friend died, and then follow something invisible across the room, it didn't feel ordinary. And honestly, I don't spend much time trying to prove what happened. I don't know if the dog sensed death. I don't know if she sensed something leaving. I don't know if it was coincidence. What I do know is that in one of the hardest moments of my life, there was this strange, brief feeling that my friend wasn't alone when she left. Maybe that's just grief looking for meaning. Maybe it's something else. Either way, years later, I still remember that single bark, one quiet sound, then silence. And somehow, all of us in that room knew the waiting was over. Story 6. My grandpa was exactly the kind of guy who should never have been left alone with a Ouija board, not because he was scared of them, the opposite. He loved that stuff. Science fiction, paranormal stories, weird mysteries, UFOs, haunted houses. If there was even a 1% chance something couldn't be explained, he was immediately interested. So naturally, he owned a Ouija board. And naturally, he spent way too much time messing with it in the basement. This was years before I was born, back when my mom and her sisters were still kids. One night, my grandpa was fooling around with the board by himself and decided to test it, not with spooky questions, with questions he already knew the answers to. Basically, the paranormal version of a CAPTCHA. Where am I from? Correct answer. What's my address? Correct answer. Who is my mother? Correct answer. At first, he assumed he was unconsciously moving the planchette himself, which is exactly what most people would assume. Then he decided to ask something a little different, something personal. How many daughters do I have? The board slowly spelled out 3. My grandpa laughed because the answer was wrong. He had 4 daughters. So he immediately corrected it. No, I have 4. The board paused, then moved again, and spelled out, not for long. Now, if you're hearing this story for the first time, that's usually the moment your brain starts yelling, cool. Great, time to put the board away forever. My grandpa apparently did not receive that message. He thought it was creepy, maybe unsettling, but he didn't treat it as a prediction. Why would he? People say weird things. Ouija boards say weird things. That's basically their entire business model. Life went on. Then 2 weeks later, one of his daughters died in a car accident. And suddenly, that conversation became the most horrifying thing he'd ever experienced. Because now every word replayed differently, not as a joke, not as a coincidence, as a warning, or at least something that looked exactly like one. Now look, I'm not here to argue whether Ouija boards are real. Maybe the whole thing was chance. Maybe memory sharpened certain details over the years. Maybe grief connected dots that were never meant to connect. All of those explanations are possible. But imagine being my grandfather. Imagine remembering that exact exchange after losing your child. You'd replay it forever. Every pause, every word, every letter, wondering if there was something you missed, something you could have changed. That's what makes this story stick with me. Not the board itself, not even the prediction. It's the awful timing. Because the human brain is built to search for meaning, and when tragedy crashes into coincidence, the two become almost impossible to separate. To this day, it's the only story my grandpa ever told that genuinely gave me chills, mostly because I can't decide what's scarier, the possibility that the board knew or the possibility that it didn't.